This is news related to the Korean presidential election and Samsung Electronics on February 15, 2022. It is the second day since Ahn Jae-ol-soo, the presidential candidate of the People's Party, proposed unifying the opposition to Yoon Suk-yeol, the People's Strength presidential candidate, on the 13th. Candidate Ahn and the People's Party camped out, saying, "This is our only proposal and this is the last." The People's Power said, "I am grateful for On's courageous decision," but drew a strong line on the method of the election in the opinion poll. However, both sides continued to leave the room for underground negotiations so that they would not become emotional battles. This weekend could be the first watershed since the two candidates have scheduled visits to the provinces all at once along with the official election campaign. They will also meet at the court debate hosted by the National Election Commission on the 21st. Whether or not a discussion between the two of them will happen before that is the point to watch. Candidate Ahn said on the 14th, "The answer has to be answered by the candidate on how to unify the candidates. I think that if the People's Power and candidate Yoon really want a change of government and are sincere, he will accept the proposal. The People's Party is putting pressure on the People's Power, emphasizing that the candidate Ahn accepted and proposed the polling method proposed by candidate Ahn even though it was the method that defeated Ahn in the unification of candidates for the Seoul mayor's by-election last year. In fact, even in a recent survey on the preference for unification, candidate Yoon generally outperformed candidate Ahn. Lee Tae-jae, head of the general election campaign of the People's Party, said, "No matter how long, a decision has to be made within 2 to 3 days." He also expressed his position that Ahn would finish the presidential race if the People's Power does not sincerely respond to unification. Choi Jin-sok, chairman of the People's Party Standing Election Countermeasures Committee, said, "We will proceed with the unification initiative while following the road to completion." The People's Power unanimously welcomed candidate On's suggestion of unification first, but shared the view that it would not be acceptable to propose a public opinion poll through the unification method. Nevertheless, there is a common perception that the atmosphere of unification must be continued. It also seems to be a kind of conciliatory gesture that candidate Yoon called Ahn on the 13th, when Ahn proposed unification, and said his wife, Professor Kim Mi-kyung, consoling him after he was diagnosed with COVID-19. It's the first time the two have spoken directly to each other on the phone since they were elected to their respective party presidential candidates. At a public meeting on the 14th, Kwon Young-se, head of the People's Power campaign, said, "I would like to first thank candidate Ahn for making a courageous decision by accommodating the people's aspirations for regime change and overwhelming victory. I want to believe in the sincerity of the candidate. Please understand what is the sure and correct path for regime change." When asked whether a separate negotiation team had been formed at a meeting with reporters, Kwon Sundae General denied that there is no such thing, implying that there is virtually no breakthrough other than negotiations between the candidates. There is no disagreement that candidates Yoon and Ahn should meet in person for unification. However, both parties are cautious in the sense that a hasty meeting in a situation where there is no consensus could break the table altogether. The two candidates will be able to meet physically at the weekend and at the start of next week. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party of Korea, which had refrained from taking an official reaction, poured out a negative outlook on the unification of the opposition on the same day, saying that the possibility was low and the effect would be low. Rep. Woo Sang-ho, head of the Democratic Party's general election campaign, said in a radio interview, "It rather feels like a barrier to unification. Isn't it a conditional proposal that it must be done in the last Seoul mayoral election?" Rep. Jin Song-jun of the same party summoned Moon Jae-in and Ahn Jae-ol-soo to unify during the 2012 presidential election, which was defeated by former President Park Geun-hye, as unification had little effect. At the time, while negotiating a specific unification method, candidate Ahn suddenly gave up on his own and it was not possible to achieve a beautiful unification, he added. Regarding Ahn Jae-ol-soo, the presidential candidate of the People's Party, who proposed unifying the opposition candidates, Lee Jun-sok, president of the People's Power, predicted that there will eventually be an end to the presidential race. In an interview with YTN news program News Q on the 14th, CEO Lee said, "Until now, I made several predictions about candidate AHN." He said. CEO Lee said, "If you look at candidate On's story on the 13th, the explanation is like this." He said, "I don't really want to unify it, but people around me told me to do it." This is not a sincere statement. He also criticized, "The idea of conducting an opinion poll and negotiating the rules now is to make the policy election disappear and shake the election board to raise awareness of candidate AHN himself." He also said, "It is very wrong to say and do something like this in front of the people," he said. It can be judged that he was trying to see the. When asked if he thinks that candidate Yoon can win even if there is no unification, CEO Lee said, "I think he can win." Chairman Lee said, "Now is not the time to talk about things like unification. Since it is the 15th to go to a car park and start an official election campaign, we will have to make every effort to finish the race, as AHN has been consistently saying. Now, the People's Party, as the situation is dire, there are talks of concessions or unification, but the exact expression can be seen as declaring support after giving up," he pointed out. In the case of a labor dispute mediation application filed by the Samsung Electronics Union to the Central Labor Relations Commission, the company failed to narrow its position. As the union secured the right to strike, there is a possibility that the first strike in the 53rd year of Samsung Electronics' founding will occur. According to industry sources on the 14th, Labor and Management held a second mediation meeting at the Central Labor Committee of the Ministry of Employment and Labor on the same day and tried to mediate the wage negotiations for 2021, but it was ultimately unsuccessful. Accordingly, the Central Committee made a decision to stop mediation. As the mediation of the Central Labor Relations Committee failed, the union secured the right to take industrial action, such as a strike, through a vote in favor of or against the union members. If the union actually decides to strike, it will be the first strike since its establishment in 1969. Currently, there are 4,500 union members, which is 4% of the total number of employees, about 110,000. Although the number is not large, there may be an effect of a strike as semiconductor plants have to operate 24 hours a day without stopping. The labor and management of Samsung Electronics held 15 wage negotiations in 2021 for 5 months from September last year, but failed to reach an agreement. The union demanded a 10 million won lump sum increase in the contract salaries of all employees and 25% of the annual operating profit, but the company insisted that it would be difficult to raise any additional wages other than the existing wage increase set by the Labor Management Council in March last year, 7.5% in total. As a result of the union members voting on the final wage negotiation proposed by the company last month, the opposition was rejected by 90.7%. The union said, "Now, Samsung Electronics top management is responsible and has to have an open dialogue with the union directly," the union said. It has been confirmed that Samsung Electronics has relocated some of its smartphone partner production lines to domestic factories. This is a special measure taken after experiencing production setbacks at major factories in Vietnam and other countries after Corona-19. It is analyzed that there has been a change in Samsung's smartphone production strategy, which prioritized efficiency and optimized the production system. At the end of last year, Samsung Electronics moved 2 production lines from a Vietnamese smartphone partner to a Korean plant located in Gyeongsang-buk-do. It is the first time that the Gumi plant has expanded its production line after moving its manufacturing base overseas. Samsung Electronics' annual smartphone production is about 300 million units. 2 factories in Vietnam's Ba Ninh and Thanh Nguyen provinces, the largest production bases, produce about 60% of Samsung's total smartphones. India's Noida plant is also responsible for 100 million units. Plants in Brazil and Indonesia adjust production according to local demand. The factory located in Gyeongsang-buk-do, the only mobile phone production base in Korea, served as a manufacturing control tower to apply and propagate new process technologies in advance. It was exclusively responsible for domestic shipments of flagship products such as foldable smartphones and Galaxy S, but its share in total production has gradually decreased. It is from last year that the keynote has changed. As global manufacturing bases, including Vietnam, were shut down due to COVID-19, severe production disruption occurred. As a special measure for supply chain management, it is known that they have sought reshoring to move overseas production lines back to Korea. In particular, it is said that Samsung Electronics realized the need to improve the level of supervision and management of premium smartphone production, which greatly affects brand credibility. It is analyzed that the production line was relocated to a plant in Korea even at the cost of rising manufacturing costs. The flagship smartphone Galaxy S22 series, which will be officially released on the 25th, is also known to be mostly produced in domestic factories. In order to maximize sales volume, it is throwing a win-win strategy of freezing the factory price, and is focusing on securing stable inventory to support it. In addition to reshoring to domestic plants, Samsung Electronics is controlling production by overseas-based plants. This is to minimize damage even if factories are closed in a specific region by distributing smartphone production concentrated in Vietnam throughout the world. It is understood that Samsung Electronics has recommended diversification of production capacity by global production plant to some major suppliers as well. At the end of last year, 2 of Samsung Electronics' Vietnamese smartphone production lines moved to domestic plants, said an official from a local manufacturing industry at a domestic plant. It seems that the domestic production volume is gradually increasing. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.